When I was a kid, I hated Advent. I think that's because we had this Advent wreath at church, and the priest would light a candle every Sunday. It was a way of counting down to Christmas. And I love Christmas, and I wanted Christmas to come. And to me, that Advent wreath felt like the most painful way of doing a countdown clock that there could be. And so I didn't like that it was making me wait and wait and wait until Christmas would come. Now, I would say that Advent's probably my favorite season. I actually really enjoy building up the anticipation in myself because for me, the experience is that it makes Christmas so much richer when I've done a good job of making myself hold back and build up the expectation and the hope for Christmas. With this video, I basically want to give an Advent explainer. I want to talk about the purpose of Advent, the history of Advent, some things to expect during this season if you go to church, and maybe how to make the most out of this season, because I think it can be a really rich experience if we're willing to give ourselves to it a little bit more. The word Advent comes from the Latin word adventus, which means coming or arrival, because during Advent we're looking forward to the arrival of Jesus at Christmas time, right? We're looking forward to his birth in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, but it's also looking forward to Jesus' second coming. So we're also looking forward to that arrival. So it's kind of celebrated in those two senses. And you'll actually notice that if you're paying attention to the readings during Masses for the first couple of weeks of Advent, we're looking forward to the second coming. We're looking forward to Jesus coming again at the end of time, where he's going to set everything right. He's going to wipe away every tear from our eyes. He's going to put an end to death. He's going to put an end to suffering and pain and evil in this world. It's something we look forward to as Christians. So we spend the first part of Advent kind of chewing on that and looking forward to that. The second part of Advent is much more focused on the arrival of Jesus the first time. We're looking forward to Jesus' birth. So you'll find the readings are a lot more about the coming Messiah, what the Messiah is going to be like. You might find some readings in there from the Gospels and kind of teeing up the narrative about Jesus' birth. And so we're celebrating those two things during this Advent season, the coming of Jesus at the end of time and the coming of Jesus at Christmas. The history of Advent is really interesting and a little bit messy because it's not like this straightforward thing like the Pope said, hey, we're going to do this is how it's going to be. It kind of developed around the world at the same time in a couple of different places. Things started to meld over the years and practices were different in one part of the world and the other part of the world. So it's kind of interesting, but this is kind of a general trend of how Advent came about. By the time of the late 400s, we're aware that in France there was clearly an established practice of Advent being a season of about 40 days, 43 days maybe. And it was kind of seen like another Lent. Remember, Lent is that season that prepares us for Easter, and it's a time of prayer, it's a time of penance. Well, Advent was treated in a similar way. It was a time of prayer, it was a time of penance even. There were days of fasting and greater penitence was being practiced by the people and by the clergy alike. But then as we see this practice start to spread around the world, some of that starts to shift a little bit. So we see the practice of Advent seems to be beginning in France, and then it moves over the centuries into England and Italy and Germany and Spain. And as it starts to spread, some things start to change along with it. And so we get by the 900s, the season of Advent used to be 40 days or so. Now it's kind of reduced down to more like 4 weeks. There's 4 Sundays of Advent. Also, as we get into the Middle Ages, we start to see that some of the expectations around penance and fasting start to be loosened up. So while there used to be a requirement of a strict fasting on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays during Advent, that starts to lighten up. Some of those expectations were still on the clergy and on religious like monks and nuns, but that wasn't a widespread thing. It was still encouraged, but it wasn't a requirement for the faithful anymore. And so it kind of shifted into this season that's about 4 weeks long, and the people are encouraged to prayer, maybe some sacrifices along the way, but more than anything, it's focused on anticipation, building up the excitement and the desire for the Lord to come. So here we are, 1,000 years later, and Advent largely looks the same way that it did 1,000 years ago. It's 4 Sundays, roughly 4 weeks. Sometimes that last week's a little short. It's a time of anticipation and building up excitement for the coming of Christ. Now, if you were to go to church during Advent, you might notice a couple things that are just different from the rest of the year. You probably notice that the clergy are wearing the color purple, or what we would use the word violet. The church might even be decorated with that color violet. You might remember that this is a color that the church has been using for a long time because it used to be a symbol of royalty. So even in Jesus's time, Caesar would have worn that color to signify that he was kind of the ruler, right? This is a color associated with royalty. Or the high priest in the temple, he would have purple in his garments as well. And so we continue to wear that color purple during Advent and Lent because it's a reminder for us that Jesus is the King. He's the King of the universe. We just celebrated Jesus Christ, King of the universe, right before Advent started. So it's a reminder for us that Jesus is King, and we can entrust ourselves to him. He's going to take care of us. He's going to provide for us because he is a good King. You'll also probably notice that in your church there's an Advent wreath. It's probably literally a wreath with the garland and everything around it, and 4 candles. And those candles are just a way of counting down the days until Christmas. If I understand correctly, it's not originally a Catholic tradition. This was a Lutheran tradition that was really beautiful, and we as Catholics have adopted it. Even we've brought it into our practice a little bit, our own devotion, because it is a worthy way of helping us to keep attentive and to think about the themes of what Advent is all about. You'll also notice that there's probably some things are toned down a little bit at Mass. So maybe the church isn't as decorated, as beautifully as it normally is. It's a little simpler. Or you'll even notice that we don't sing the Gloria during Advent. You know, that song that goes,
Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God in the highest.
That one. We don't sing that during Advent because it's just a way of us holding back our joy a little bit until we can fully express our joy on Christmas. So it's just a way of kind of practicing this habit of anticipating the fullness of joy that God wants to give us at Christmas. We want to enter into that with our full heart. So we're trying to let that joy begin to swell up in us through a spirit of expectation and longing for the Lord. I actually think it's really important for us to build up that spirit of expectation during the Advent season. You know, if you've ever been to Disneyland or Disney World, it's fascinating to look at how long a person has to wait in line to get on the ride. I mean, Disneyland has had to build these entire buildings, these huge structures devoted to just making sure that people can stand in line. But the experience of standing in line at Disneyland actually builds up the excitement and the anticipation for the ride. It's not like I just stepped up to the ride and I got on and the ride's over. No, the experience of standing in line, yes, it's a long time, but there's music that kind of clues you into some of the things you're going to hear when you're on the ride. There's some of the atmosphere kind of painting the picture of what you're going to experience. Now, you don't get to experience the fullness of it until you're on the ride, but standing in line builds up the expectation, builds up the excitement, and because we've allowed the excitement to swell, it makes the enjoyment so much better when it finally comes. And I think of Advent as doing something similar. It's intended to help us let the expectation build a little bit, let it swell, the desire for the Lord. I would say there's a few things we can do to help us really get the most out of Advent this year. First, do things that help you to stir up the expectation. Like don't fully give in to Christmas yet. I know that's really hard. You really want to turn on the radio and just start listening to Christmas music right now, or you want to go gung-ho and just decorate the whole house with all the Christmas decorations. I would say at least try to hold back somewhat. Maybe don't put up all the decorations yet. You know, one thing I do at the beginning of Advent, I put up the Christmas tree and I put purple lights on it, and that's it. I don't allow myself to put up all the Christmas lights and all the decorations and the ornaments and all of that. But having the tree there, it's interesting what that does. Like it begins to build up the excitement for me. I look forward to Christmas. The purple lights remind me that it's still Advent, so I'm not supposed to yet fully engage that joy that I really want to experience. But it allows that joy to grow in me a little bit. The expectation, at least, of the joy can grow in me so that when Christmas comes, it's just so much more meaningful. Decorating the tree is a lot more fun when it happens. Putting out the Christ into the nativity scene is a lot more exciting for me. So I think there's things that we can do to help build up that excitement by holding back a little bit on what we do right now to start to experience Christmas. Another thing we can do is maybe choose some spiritual reading or choose something to watch that's going to start feeding us spiritually. I'm so convinced of how important it is that we be reading spiritual material, that we have a spiritual book we're reading right now, or that we're picking up the Gospels just to follow along with the life of Christ and be inspired a little bit more. You could watch the Chosen TV series, this whole story about the life of Jesus. You could watch The Search or Alpha, anything that can kind of stir up a deeper appreciation for who Jesus is, why Jesus came, why he's important for us. I think as we come to appreciate him and know him and understand him more, it builds up a greater desire for him for Christmas and for him to come at the end of time. We're going to be finding ourselves really giving into that spirit of Advent, of longing for his coming, because we've come to really appreciate why he came and why we need him to come again. Finally, I would say for your prayer time, simply come up with one thing that you really desire from Jesus and ask for it every day of Advent. In a way, it's kind of like what we do with kids, and we ask, hey, what do you want for Christmas? In reality, what do you want for Christmas? Like, what do you really want from the Lord deep down? Maybe it's a greater experience of his presence in your life. Maybe it's a deeper experience of joy or trust, or for some of the clouds of confusion or depression to clear. Start asking for that thing. And maybe it doesn't get answered right away. Maybe the Lord's going to allow the anticipation even there to grow within us. But I think start asking for the thing that you really want. And I think you're going to find that you get a whole lot more out of Advent than you ever have. And you're going to get much more out of Christmas because you'll see how important Jesus is. You'll be looking forward to Jesus' coming because you'll have a deeper trust that he can do the thing that you're wanting him to do in your life. So this Advent, let yourself wait. Build up the expectation of Jesus' coming, and you will find that Christmas is so much richer and deeper than you could have ever imagined. God bless you.